The flight had started like any other long journey in the sky. The kind where nothing feels special at first, and everything seems routine. People boarded one after another, placing their bags in the overhead compartments, finding their seats, and settling in for hours of travel ahead. Some were excited to reach their destination, while others just wanted to sleep through the journey and forget about time. Inside the cabin, the soft sound of movement slowly faded as everyone got comfortable. The plane was not fully crowded, but most seats were taken. A few empty spots here and there made it feel even calmer, like there was extra space to breathe. The lights above were soft and warm, not too bright, not too dark. It helped people relax without thinking too much. Among the passengers was a woman sitting near the window in the middle section of the plane. She had chosen that seat quietly when she boarded. She did not speak much to anyone around her. There was nothing loud or attention-seeking about her presence. She simply placed a small bag under the seat in front of her, adjusted her jacket, and looked out of the window for a moment before leaning back. To anyone who glanced at her, she looked like an ordinary traveler. Nothing about her stood out. She was calm, collected, and seemed slightly tired, like someone who had traveled before and just wanted a peaceful flight. After a few minutes, she closed her eyes. Slowly, her breathing became steady, and she drifted into sleep. The plane took off smoothly, climbing higher into the sky. The city lights below turned into small glowing dots before disappearing completely into clouds. Inside, the cabin remained quiet except for the low engine sound and the occasional footsteps of flight attendants moving through the aisle. Time passed slowly once the plane reached cruising altitude. People started settling into their own world. Some watched movies on small screens. Some listened to music. Others simply stared out at the clouds, thinking about their lives. A few passengers were already asleep, their heads resting against windows or seatbacks. Everything felt normal. Too normal. No one expected anything unusual to happen on this flight. The woman by the window remained asleep, her posture relaxed. Her hands were folded lightly in her lap. There was a strange calmness about her sleep, as if she had trained herself to rest anywhere, even in the middle of a flying aircraft. But nobody noticed that detail. Everyone was focused on their own journey. The flight attendants moved quietly through the aisle, checking seatbelts, offering drinks, and making sure everything was fine. Their expressions were calm, as always, with polite smiles that made passengers feel safe. Everything was going according to plan. For the first part of the flight, there was nothing unusual at all. But then, something began to change. At first, it was so small that most passengers did not even notice. A slight shift in the aircraft's movement. A gentle dip that felt like passing through a thin patch of uneven air. Some people lifted their heads for a second, then relaxed again when it passed. Planes often moved like that. It was normal. But a few minutes later, another small movement came. This one was slightly stronger. A few cups on tray tables rattled lightly. A couple of passengers looked around with mild curiosity. Still, nobody felt alarmed. The cabin lights remained steady, but something in the atmosphere slowly started to feel different. It was not visible, but it could be sensed. The kind of feeling people get when they don't know why, but they suddenly become more aware of everything around them. The woman near the window shifted slightly in her sleep. Her head tilted a little, but she did not wake up. Then, without warning, the seatbelt sign turned on. A soft chime echoed through the cabin. Most passengers looked up at the same time, as if reacting to a shared signal. The seatbelt light was something everyone understood. It meant stay seated, stay calm, and remain where you are. The flight attendants immediately moved with more purpose. Their steps became quicker but still controlled. They began checking passengers more carefully, asking people to fasten seatbelts if they had not already done so. The calm feeling in the cabin started to shift into something more serious. A few passengers exchanged glances. Some whispered quietly. Others just looked forward, waiting to understand what was happening. The plane gave another slight movement. This one was more noticeable. Not dangerous yet, but enough to make a few people grip their armrests a little tighter. The sleeping woman finally opened her eyes. Slowly, She blinked a few times, adjusting to the cabin light. She looked around without any sudden movement. She did not seem panicked, just alert, like someone who wakes up easily and observes their surroundings before reacting. She noticed the seatbelt sign was on. She noticed the movement of the flight attendants. She noticed the quiet tension that was slowly building inside the cabin. But she said nothing. She simply sat up a little straighter in her seat. At that moment, the plane shifted again. A slightly stronger movement than before. A few passengers let out small gasps. Not screams, not panic, just surprise. The kind of reaction people have when something feels unexpected but not yet dangerous. Still, the cabin remained mostly controlled. Then came the announcement. The captain's voice came through the speakers. At first, it sounded normal, like any other routine update. But there was something different in his tone. A slight seriousness that immediately caught attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began. A short pause followed. Even that pause felt heavier than usual. Then he continued. "We are currently experiencing some unexpected weather conditions ahead. The flight crew is monitoring the situation closely. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." Most passengers nodded silently. This kind of announcement was not uncommon. Weather changes happen during flights all the time. But then the captain spoke again. This time his voice carried a different weight. Not panic, but urgency. "If there is any fighter pilot on board this aircraft, please identify yourself to a flight attendant immediately." The moment those words were spoken, the entire cabin changed. It was as if the air itself became heavier. For a second, there was complete silence. No talking, no movement, no sound except the engines outside. People looked at each other with confusion. Some frowned, trying to understand if they had heard correctly. Others leaned closer to their seatmates, whispering quietly, "A fighter pilot? Why would a commercial flight need that?" Questions began forming in everyone's minds at the same time, but no one had answers. The flight attendants exchanged quick looks, moving faster now through the aisles. Their expressions were still controlled, but there was no hiding the seriousness anymore. Something was clearly not normal. The woman by the window turned her head slightly toward the aisle. She was fully awake now. Her eyes were calm, but focused. She was not reacting like the other passengers. There was no confusion on her face, only quiet attention. She watched the movement of the crew carefully. One of the flight attendants passed by her seat, scanning passengers quickly. The woman hesitated for a moment. Then, in a calm voice, she spoke. Not loud, not dramatic, just enough for the attendant to hear. "Excuse me." The flight attendant turned immediately. "Yes, ma'am?" The woman looked at her for a brief moment, as if deciding whether to say something or not. Then she asked a simple question. And in that single moment, everything inside the cabin began to shift in a way no one expected. The flight attendant stopped for a moment when the woman spoke. The cabin noise around them felt distant now, even though nothing had changed physically. It was just the way attention works when something unexpected is about to happen. The attendant leaned slightly closer, trying to hear clearly over the soft hum of the aircraft. The woman did not look nervous. She was calm but alert. Her eyes were steady, and her voice was controlled, like someone used to speaking in serious situations. She repeated her words again, this time a little clearer, so there was no confusion. The flight attendant's expression changed instantly. First it was surprise, then disbelief, then something closer to concern mixed with urgency. For a moment, she just stared at the woman, as if trying to understand if she had heard correctly. In a normal flight, no one expects a passenger to say something that changes the entire atmosphere of the cabin. The woman did not add anything extra. She simply waited, patient, calm, not pushing, not demanding attention, just waiting for the response. The flight attendant finally nodded once, quickly, as if she had made a decision in her mind. "Please stay here for a moment," she said quietly, then turned and walked fast toward the front of the plane. Her steps were quicker than before, not running but clearly urgent. Passengers nearby noticed this change and started looking around again. A few leaned into the aisle, trying to understand what was happening. The woman remained seated, still calm. She adjusted her position slightly and looked forward, not reacting to the growing curiosity around her. In a matter of seconds, the flight attendant reached the front section where the other crew members were gathered. She spoke quickly into a communication device near the galley. Her voice was low, but sharp enough to show urgency. A second later, another crew member looked toward the cabin in surprise. Then, without hesitation, they moved toward the cockpit area. Inside the cabin, passengers were now fully aware that something unusual was happening. People who were previously relaxed now looked alert. Some tightened their seatbelts. Others stopped talking completely. The atmosphere had shifted from calm to uncertain. The captain's earlier message still echoed in everyone's mind. Any fighter pilot on board. That sentence now felt heavier than before. Meanwhile, the woman by the window stayed still. She did not stand up. She did not look around excessively. She simply observed quietly. There was something about her behavior that was different from the rest of the passengers. While others showed confusion or curiosity, she showed control. A few rows away, a passenger whispered to another, trying to guess what was going on. But the words were unclear, lost in the low background noise of the aircraft. Then, a flight attendant returned to the aisle. This time, she walked directly toward the woman's seat. The cabin seemed to notice her movement. Several heads turned. Even those pretending not to care were now watching carefully. The flight attendant stopped beside the woman and spoke softly. "Ma'am," she said, "can you come with me for a moment?" The tone was polite, but there was seriousness underneath it. The woman nodded once. She stood up slowly, adjusting her jacket. There was no hesitation in her movement. She picked up her small bag from under the seat and followed the attendant without asking unnecessary questions. As they walked down the aisle, passengers looked at her more closely now. Some were confused. Others were curious. A few tried to guess what was happening, but no one had enough information. She did not look like someone causing trouble. She did not look panicked either. She looked steady, focused, like someone who understood the situation even if others did not. Step by step, she moved closer to the front of the aircraft. The cabin felt quieter as she passed through it, even though no one had told passengers to be silent. It was just natural. People tend to become quiet when they sense something important is happening. When she reached the front, the flight attendant guided her toward a restricted area near the cockpit. Another crew member opened the door carefully and spoke briefly into a headset. A moment later, the door opened wider. The woman was invited inside. This was the moment when several passengers realized this was not a normal situation anymore. Inside the cockpit, the atmosphere was serious. The captain was seated, focused on the controls. His co-pilot was also alert, watching the instruments carefully. There was a noticeable tension in the room, the kind that comes when experienced professionals are dealing with unexpected conditions. The captain looked up when the woman entered. For a second, he simply observed her. Not because he doubted her, but because he was trying to confirm what he had been told. The flight attendant spoke first. "She says she is a former fighter pilot," she said. The words hung in the air for a moment. The captain leaned back slightly, studying the woman more carefully now. His expression remained controlled, but there was clear seriousness in his eyes. The aircraft was still stable, but the situation required attention. Outside, weather conditions were becoming more unpredictable. The navigation systems showed changes ahead that needed careful handling. The captain spoke calmly. "We are facing unstable air conditions ahead," he said. "One of our crew members is unwell, and we need support in monitoring systems. Do you have experience with high-altitude flight operations?" The woman did not answer immediately. She stepped slightly forward and looked at the instruments. Her eyes scanned the cockpit with quiet familiarity. She was not rushing. She was observing, understanding, analyzing. After a few seconds, she spoke. "Yes," she said simply. Just one word, but it carried weight. The captain nodded slightly, then pointed toward a seat beside him. "All right," he said. "Let's work together." There was no drama in his voice. No unnecessary explanation, just a decision made based on trust and necessity. The woman took her position calmly. She adjusted herself, looked at the control panel again, and began asking a few short questions. Not basic questions, but specific ones that only someone with real flight experience would ask. The captain noticed this immediately. His expression changed slightly. Not shock, but recognition. He now understood that she was not exaggerating her background. Outside the cockpit window, clouds were thickening in the distance. The flight path ahead was not completely clear. Small adjustments would be needed to ensure a smooth journey. Inside the cabin, passengers had no idea what was happening behind the cockpit door. They only knew that something unusual had occurred, and now the woman who had been sleeping earlier was no longer in her seat. Some passengers began whispering again. Did she really go to the cockpit? Why would they need a passenger for that? Is something wrong with the plane? No one had answers. Meanwhile, inside the cockpit, the situation was becoming more focused. The woman studied the instruments carefully. She remained calm, even when minor turbulence began to affect the aircraft slightly. The captain explained the weather pattern ahead in simple terms. The air currents were unstable, and adjustments needed to be made carefully to avoid discomfort and maintain safe flight conditions. The woman listened closely, then responded with short instructions and observations. Her tone remained steady throughout. There was no panic, no unnecessary words, just clear thinking. The co-pilot also began paying closer attention to her inputs. At first, there had been uncertainty, but now there was understanding. She was not just a passenger helping out. She was someone who had done this before. Outside, the aircraft entered a slightly rough patch of air. The plane moved gently up and down, causing a few moments of discomfort in the cabin. But it remained stable. Inside the cockpit, the woman adjusted her focus and continued working with the crew. Slowly, the tension began to shift. Not disappear completely, but ease slightly. Because now, they were not handling the situation alone. Someone who understood the sky was sitting with them. And that changed everything. The cockpit felt different now, not because the aircraft itself had changed, but because of the presence of someone new inside it. The woman sat quietly in the extra seat beside the captain, her eyes focused on the control panel in front of her. Every light, every indicator, every small movement on the screens seemed familiar to her in a way that was hard to ignore. First, there was silence. Not an uncomfortable silence, but a careful one. The kind that happens when people are still trying to understand each other. The captain kept his hands steady on the controls while watching her reaction from the corner of his eye. The co-pilot remained alert, checking the readings again and again, making sure nothing was missed. Outside the cockpit window, the sky looked calm in some directions but slightly heavy in others. Clouds were forming in layers, not dangerous yet, but unpredictable enough to require attention. The aircraft was still stable, but small movements in the air were beginning to increase. The woman leaned forward slightly. She studied the navigation screen first, then the altitude readings, then the wind patterns displayed on a small digital display. She did not rush. She took her time, as if reading something she already understood but still wanted to confirm. The captain spoke quietly. "We are approaching a zone of unstable air. Nothing extreme yet, but it can shift quickly. We want to maintain a safe and steady path." The woman nodded once. Then she asked a simple question. "How long until we enter the main turbulence zone?" Her tone was calm, controlled, not curious like a passenger, but analytical like a pilot. The co-pilot checked the data and replied, "Less than 10 minutes." The woman did not react with surprise. She simply absorbed the information and looked back at the screen. That small reaction told the crew something important. She was not guessing. She was processing. Inside the cabin, passengers were still unaware of what was happening in the cockpit. They only knew that the earlier announcement had created tension. Some people tried to remain calm, while others quietly discussed the unusual request for a fighter pilot. A few passengers looked toward the front of the plane, hoping to see movement, but nothing was visible from their seats. The curtain separating the cockpit area remained closed. Meanwhile, inside, the situation was becoming more focused. The aircraft entered a slightly rough patch of air. Started slowly. A gentle shake. A minor shift. Enough to make a few passengers adjust their grip on armrests, but not enough to cause panic. Still, inside the cockpit, even small changes mattered. The woman immediately noticed the shift. Her eyes moved quickly to the wind pattern display. "The airflow is changing faster than expected," she said calmly. The captain nodded. "Yes, we are adjusting for it." The woman leaned back slightly, thinking. For a few seconds, she said nothing. Then she pointed gently toward a section of the screen. "Try adjusting the angle slightly to the left path. There is a smoother corridor between those currents." The captain looked at her suggestion. It was not random. It was precise. He checked the data again. The co-pilot also looked closer. There it was. A narrow path between two unstable airstreams. Not obvious at first glance, but visible to someone trained in reading patterns quickly. The captain made a small adjustment. The aircraft responded almost immediately. The movement became slightly smoother. Not perfect yet, but better. The woman nodded once, as if confirming her observation had been correct. Outside, the sky was still unstable, but the aircraft had entered a more manageable path. Inside the cockpit, something subtle began to change. Trust. At first, the captain had simply accepted help because it was necessary. But now, after seeing her understanding of the systems and the air patterns, his confidence in her was growing. The co-pilot also began speaking more directly to her. "How did you spot that path so quickly?" he asked. The woman replied without looking away from the screen. "Experience. You stop looking at what is obvious and start noticing what is missing." The answer was simple, but it carried weight. For a moment, no one spoke. The aircraft moved slightly again, entering another mild turbulence zone. The seat vibrated gently, and the instruments flickered slightly with changes in pressure. The captain adjusted the controls carefully. The woman watched closely. Then she said something that changed the direction of the conversation. "You are reacting correctly, but slightly late. If you adjust earlier, the movement will be smoother for passengers." The captain glanced at her. He did not take it as criticism. He took it as observation. "Earlier adjustments require predicting shifts before they fully appear," he said. The woman nodded. "Yes, that is exactly what makes it possible." There was a brief pause. Then she added, "In high-speed flight, waiting for confirmation is already too late." The co-pilot exchanged a quick look with the captain. They both understood what she meant. This was not theory. This was experience from a different kind of flying entirely. Outside, the sky grew slightly darker in one direction, though it was still daytime. The weather system ahead was shifting slowly, forming layers that needed careful navigation. The captain spoke again. "We are stable for now, but the main turbulence zone is still ahead." The woman looked forward. "I know," she said quietly. There was no fear in her voice, only awareness. A few seconds passed. Then she added something unexpected. "I have flown through similar patterns before. They usually look worse than they feel if handled correctly." The co-pilot raised an eyebrow slightly. The captain asked calmly, "In what conditions?" The woman paused for a moment. Then she answered, "In missions where there was no room for delay. You learn to read the air differently when every second matters." There was a quiet shift in the room after she said that. Not tension, respect. The aircraft entered another mild shake. This time it lasted slightly longer. Inside the cabin, passengers felt it too. A few looked up nervously. Others tightened their seatbelts again. Still, there was no panic, just growing awareness that the flight was not entirely smooth. Inside the cockpit, the woman stayed focused. Her eyes moved between readings and outside conditions. Then she made another suggestion. "Reduce altitude slightly by a small margin. It may help avoid the stronger current forming above this layer." The captain checked the data. The co-pilot confirmed it. It made sense. The captain adjusted the altitude carefully. The aircraft responded. This time, the difference was more noticeable. The movement became smoother. The turbulence reduced slightly. It was not a dramatic change, but it was enough to be felt. The captain exhaled slowly. That helped, he admitted. The woman did not respond with pride or satisfaction. She simply nodded, as if it was expected. Time passed slowly inside the cockpit. Every few minutes, small adjustments were made. Sometimes by the captain, sometimes with input from the woman. It was becoming less about one person helping and more about teamwork. Outside, the weather system continued to shift, but the aircraft was now moving through it with more control. Inside the cabin, passengers had no idea how much coordination was happening in the front. To them, it was still just a flight with occasional turbulence. But the atmosphere had changed. People were more alert now. They noticed every small movement, every sound, every shift in the aircraft. Meanwhile, the woman remained steady. No visible stress, no unnecessary movement, just focus. The captain began asking her more direct questions. Not because he was unsure anymore, but because he trusted her input. Based on your experience, what would you expect next in this pattern? The woman studied the screen again, then answered. A brief calm zone, followed by a short but stronger turbulence wave. After that, it should stabilize. The co-pilot checked the forecast. It matched her prediction closely. The captain nodded slowly. That was the moment when something became clear without being said. She was not just assisting. She was reading the sky like a language. And the flight, which had started as an ordinary journey, was now being guided by experience that most people on board would never have expected to be sitting in a passenger seat just hours earlier. Inside the cockpit, the atmosphere had slowly changed from uncertainty to controlled focus. The aircraft was still moving through slightly unstable air, but now every movement felt more manageable. It was not because the weather had suddenly improved, but because the way it was being handled had improved. The woman sat in the co-pilot seat with quiet attention. Her eyes kept moving between the instruments and the view outside the window. She was not in a hurry. She was not reacting emotionally. She was observing, thinking, and responding only when needed. That calm behavior was becoming more important than anything else. The captain stayed focused on the controls, but now there was a visible difference in his posture. Earlier, he had carried the full responsibility alone. Now, even though he was still in command, he was sharing the mental load with someone who clearly understood what was happening in the sky. The co-pilot was also more relaxed than before. Not careless, but less tense. It was the kind of change that happens when uncertainty begins to turn into understanding. Outside, the aircraft entered another patch of uneven air. It was not strong enough to cause danger, but it was enough to remind everyone that the situation was still active. The plane gently shifted, then stabilized, then shifted again in a slow rhythm. Inside the cabin, passengers felt it too. Some looked up from their seats. Others adjusted their posture. A few quietly held their armrests a little tighter. The movement was noticeable, but still within safe limits. In the cockpit, the woman immediately noticed the pattern. "This is the transition before the main turbulence wave," she said calmly. The captain looked at her. "You are still expecting that stronger wave?" he asked. "Yes," she replied, "but it will be short. If we stay on the current path, it should pass quickly." The co-pilot checked the instruments again. The data matched her prediction. The captain made a small adjustment to the flight path. The aircraft responded smoothly. The movement reduced slightly. Not completely gone, but softer than before. The woman watched carefully. Then she leaned slightly forward. "There is something else," she said. Both the captain and co-pilot turned their attention toward her. She pointed gently at a section of the weather display. "This pattern here is not fully stable. It looks like it is breaking into smaller currents. That usually means the main wave is losing strength." The captain studied it closely. He nodded slowly. "You are right," he said. There was a brief silence. Not uncomfortable, just thoughtful. For the first time since the situation began, the aircraft felt like it was moving toward stability instead of uncertainty. The woman remained focused, but there was no tension in her expression. It was the calm focus of someone who had been in similar situations before and knew how they usually ended. The captain spoke again. You have been quiet about your past, but your understanding of these patterns is very specific. The woman looked at the screen for a moment before answering. I spent years in environments where the sky was not predictable, she said simply. You learn to read small changes instead of waiting for big signs. The co-pilot listened carefully. That kind of reading is not easy, he said. The woman nodded slightly. It becomes natural after enough time, she replied. The sky always gives signals. Most people just don't notice them early enough. Another slight movement passed through the aircraft. This one was weaker than the previous ones. The captain adjusted the controls again, and the plane remained steady. Inside the cabin, passengers began to feel a slight improvement. The movement was still there, but less sharp, less unpredictable. A few passengers even started to relax slightly again, thinking the worst might be passing. But inside the cockpit, the work was still ongoing. The woman was not relaxed yet. She kept watching the patterns carefully. Then she spoke again. The main turbulence wave is close, but it is splitting. That is good. It means it will not hit all at once. The captain confirmed it with the instruments. She was correct. The co-pilot leaned forward slightly. So instead of one strong impact, we will get smaller ones? He asked. Yes, she said. But they will be easier to manage if we stay ahead of them. The captain adjusted the course slightly again. The aircraft responded without difficulty. There was a quiet moment after that. A few seconds where nothing major changed. But that silence felt different now. Felt stable. For the first time since the captain's announcement, there was a sense that control was returning fully to the cockpit. The woman leaned back slightly in her seat, but her eyes did not leave the instruments completely. The captain noticed this. You are still expecting something, he said. Yes, she replied. But not danger. Just adjustments. The co-pilot looked outside the window. The clouds ahead looked less dense now. Still present, but not as heavy as before. It looks like it is clearing slightly, he said. The woman nodded. It is breaking apart. That is why the turbulence is becoming weaker. Another gentle shake moved through the aircraft. This one was brief, almost like a reminder that the system was still active, but losing strength. Inside the cabin, passengers noticed it too. A few murmurs spread quietly. Some people looked relieved. Others still stayed cautious. But the overall feeling was changing. The fear that had appeared earlier was slowly being replaced by curiosity and relief. Inside the cockpit, the captain finally spoke in a slightly more relaxed tone. We are in a better position than before, he said. The woman nodded. Yes, it should stabilize fully after the next few minutes. The co-pilot checked the data again. Everything matched her prediction. There was no contradiction, only confirmation. For a brief moment, no one spoke. The aircraft continued forward smoothly. Then the woman pointed again. This section here, she said. We should avoid passing directly through it. It is the last remaining strong pocket of unstable air. The captain looked at it. It was a small area on the screen, but clearly active. He adjusted the flight path slightly to the side. The aircraft shifted gently, then settled into a smoother route. The movement became noticeably calmer. The co-pilot let out a slow breath. That's much better, he said quietly. The woman did not react emotionally. She simply nodded. Inside her mind, everything was still focused on patterns and timing. No distraction, no unnecessary thoughts, just reading and responding. The captain finally glanced at her more directly. I have to admit, he said, your timing is very accurate. You are not reacting late. You are predicting early. The woman replied calmly. That is the only way to fly in unstable conditions. The co-pilot looked at her for a moment. Have you been in situations like this often? He asked. She paused slightly, then answered. Yes, but not always in passenger aircraft. The room became quiet for a moment, not because of fear, but because of understanding. Her experience was deeper than what had been assumed at the beginning of the flight. Still, she did not go into details. She did not need to. Her actions already spoke clearly. The aircraft moved into another calmer section of the sky. This time, the change was noticeable. The shaking reduced significantly. The instruments showed more stable readings. The captain adjusted his grip slightly, relaxing just a little. "We are almost clear of the main system," he said. The woman looked forward. "Yes," she replied. "Now it is just the remaining edges." The co-pilot checked the forecast ahead. The data confirmed it. The worst part had passed. Inside the cabin, passengers felt it too. The movement had become much smoother. Some people finally leaned back in their seats properly. A few even looked out of the windows more calmly now, as if the fear from earlier had started to fade. Inside the cockpit, the atmosphere had fully shifted now. It was no longer tension. It was controlled confidence. The captain finally spoke in a lighter tone. "Whatever happens next, we are in a much better position than when this started." The woman gave a small nod, but she still kept her attention on the instruments, because even when the sky begins to clear, experience teaches one simple thing. You never stop watching until it is fully calm. Inside the cockpit, the final stretch of the flight felt different from the earlier moments. The tension that had filled the air at the beginning was no longer there. It had slowly faded, replaced by a steady calm that came only after difficulty had passed. The aircraft was now moving through much smoother air. Small vibrations still appeared from time to time, but they were light and predictable. Nothing like the earlier unstable conditions. The instruments showed stable readings, and the outside sky looked clearer with every passing minute. The captain kept his hands steady on the controls, but his shoulders had relaxed slightly. The co-pilot was still alert, but no longer tense. The situation had shifted from handling danger to confirming safety. The woman sat quietly in the co-pilot seat. She had not moved much for a while. Her focus was still on the screens, but her expression was calmer now. The urgency that had been there earlier was gone. What remained was simple attention. For a few moments no one spoke. Only the soft sound of the aircraft and the steady beeping of instruments filled the cockpit. Then the captain finally broke the silence. "We are clear of the main system," he said. "The rest should be smooth." The co-pilot checked the readings again and confirmed it. "Yes, it's stable now." There was a small pause after that. A quiet moment where everyone in the cockpit understood the same thing without needing many words. The difficult part of the flight was over. The woman nodded slightly but did not fully relax yet. She still looked at the instruments carefully, as if making sure nothing unexpected remained hidden in the data. The captain noticed this. "You are still checking everything," he said. The woman replied calmly. "Just confirming. It's always better to be sure until the end." The co-pilot gave a small understanding nod. That simple sentence reflected experience. Not fear, not doubt, just discipline. Outside, the sky was now much clearer. The heavy cloud systems that had caused the turbulence were slowly breaking apart behind them. The aircraft had moved beyond the strongest part of the weather zone. Inside the cabin, passengers were also feeling the difference. The seatbelt sign was still on, but many people had already noticed that the movement was far less intense than before. Some passengers looked relieved. Others simply sat quietly, processing what had just happened during the flight. A few people whispered among themselves, trying to understand why the captain had asked for a fighter pilot earlier. But no one had a clear answer. Inside the cockpit, the focus was now on maintaining smooth flight and preparing for the final phase of the journey. The captain spoke again, this time in a more relaxed tone. "You handled that extremely well," he said to the woman. She looked at him briefly. "We handled it," she replied. It was not a correction. It was a reminder that it had been teamwork. The co-pilot nodded in agreement. "Still," he said, "your timing was very precise. You saw changes before they became visible on the main readings." The woman gave a slight shrug. "That is usually how it works when you've spent enough time reading patterns like this," she said. The captain studied her for a moment. There was still curiosity in his expression. Not about her ability anymore, but about her background. "You were not just guessing," he said. "Your understanding of those air shifts was very specific." The woman paused for a moment before answering. I learned early that the sky doesn't change suddenly, she said. It changes in layers. If you understand the layers, you can predict what comes next. The co-pilot leaned slightly forward. That is exactly what you were doing, he said. The woman nodded once. Yes. Another brief silence followed. The aircraft continued forward steadily, now in a completely stable environment. The captain checked the remaining flight path. We are about 20 minutes from descent preparation, he said. The woman looked at the screen. Everything ahead is clear, she said after a moment. The co-pilot confirmed it again. No further turbulence systems were showing on the route. The captain finally leaned back slightly in his seat. For the first time since the issue began, there was no pressure in his posture. Then he said something quietly. When I made that announcement earlier, I was not sure what response we would get. The woman turned her head slightly toward him. You did what was necessary, she said. The captain nodded slowly. Yes. But I did not expect the response to come from someone with your level of experience sitting in a passenger seat. The woman did not respond with pride. She simply said, it could have been anyone trained for it. I just happened to be here. The co-pilot smiled slightly. But it wasn't anyone, he said. It was you. The woman did not reply to that. Instead, she looked back at the instruments. The aircraft remained stable. Minutes passed slowly. The feeling inside the cockpit had now fully shifted to calm control. There was no urgency left, only routine monitoring. The captain began preparing for the next phase of the flight. We will start descent procedures soon, he said. The woman nodded. Standard approach should be fine, she said. The co-pilot agreed. Yes, no complications expected. For the next few minutes, they worked quietly together, adjusting final settings, checking fuel balance, and confirming navigation points. Everything was now smooth and predictable. Outside, the horizon looked clear. The weather system that had caused earlier concern was now far behind them. Inside the cabin, passengers began to notice the change too. The earlier tension was gone. Some people started relaxing completely. A few even looked out of the windows with relief, realizing that the rough part of the journey had passed. The seatbelt sign was still on, but the atmosphere felt lighter. Back in the cockpit, the captain spoke again, this time with a slight tone of appreciation. I think passengers will remember this flight for a long time, he said. The co-pilot nodded. Yes, especially the earlier announcement. The woman remained quiet for a moment. Then she said, most of them probably won't even know what actually happened up here. The captain looked at her. Maybe that is a good thing, he said. If everything ends safely, passengers don't need to know every detail. The woman nodded. Yes, safety is what matters, not the complexity behind it. Another few minutes passed. The aircraft began its descent smoothly. No turbulence, no instability, just a controlled and steady movement downward. Inside the cabin, passengers could feel the gentle change in altitude. The journey was clearly approaching its end. The captain finally relaxed his hands fully from the controls for a brief moment. We are good, he said. The co-pilot confirmed. All systems stable. The woman looked out of the cockpit window one last time. The sky outside was calm now, completely different from what it had been earlier. She leaned back slightly in her seat, finally allowing herself a small moment of rest. Not celebration, not emotion, just quiet acceptance that the situation had passed safely. The captain turned slightly toward her. Before we land, he said, I want to say something. The woman looked at him. He continued, today could have gone very differently, but your presence made a real difference. She did not respond immediately. Then she said softly, you would have handled it too. I just helped you see it earlier. The co-pilot shook his head slightly. Not many passengers can say that, he said. The woman gave a small, quiet smile. Nothing more. The aircraft continued its smooth descent toward the destination. Inside the cabin, passengers remained unaware of the full story behind what had happened in the cockpit. To them, it had been a slightly turbulent flight that was now calming down. But for the crew inside the cockpit, it had been something more. A reminder that sometimes help comes from the most unexpected place. And sometimes, the person sitting quietly among passengers is the one who understands the sky better than anyone else on board.